So it's a kind of a strange thing to start a sermon with, I suppose, this paddle. I'll explain more about it in a moment. One of my favorite scriptures is today's Old Testament lesson, these words from Isaiah the prophet, where Isaiah in chapter 42 speaks what we call the first of 4 servant songs about the one who will come to be the Messiah, the one who will come to be that servant that the Father says that God sends to be our salvation, our help, and our hope. And these words I've preached on a number of times in however many years, since 1984, that I've been pastor. When this scripture comes around every 3 years, I like to choose it because it really is one of my favorites. And so because I've preached on it a couple times, I look for a different way into this piece of scripture. And I came upon that verse where God says, or the Father says to the servant, I will take you by hand. I really like that image of the Father taking the Son by hand and bringing him to our level, to our world, to our flesh and blood, so where he can and will be our Savior. And then from his hand, through the waters of baptism, he grabs hold of each of us and calls us his son, his daughter, calls us forgiven, calls us and wraps his arms around us. So the idea of from the Father's hand to the Son's hand to our hands now, as we become those people about who these scriptures speak of, that he has taken us by hand to lead us out into the world, to be worshipers, be God's people, be the believers, and also then to do those things in the scriptures about doing justice, loving our neighbor as ourselves, loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. So having said that, now you're really wondering what this is. This is my dad's fraternity paddle. If you've ever been in a fraternity, this is what the paddle looks like. My dad was a member of the Theta Chi fraternity at the University of Wisconsin back in the 40s. He graduated in 1950. This paddle was a very important possession that my dad owned. He treasured this paddle. Not because he ever used it to paddle us, but this paddle symbolized for him that he always had a place where he belonged. That there was always a fraternity. There was always a community of people that he could call on whenever he needed them, wherever he needed them. In fact, I've told you the story before about when my older brother was gone for a number of years. It was a member of the Theta Chi fraternity who found my brother in Hawaii and let my dad know. So this paddle to my dad symbolized that community that he was part of. And I think this symbolizing that for him reminds me of what baptism symbolizes for us, what baptism is for us, but an invitation into the community of believers, into the family of God. This paddle also let my dad know that he always had a place where he was part, where he belonged, where he was family. And so also I share that with you, that from baptism, you and I always know that we belong not just here at Bethlehem, but wherever you go. Wherever you go, there is a church family waiting to welcome you. There is a church family waiting to embrace you, waiting to call you sister, brother as well. This paddle also reminds me of a couple other things, because by its shape, this is not a paddle for a canoe. That some initiating rite back in 1950, this paddle was used probably to spank. And if we're talking about spanking, all of you who have been spanked probably know that there are things that you and I do that are wrong, that you and I misbehave, that we don't follow the rules all the time. That's not the purpose of this paddle. It was not to punish, but to initiate. But nonetheless, that reminds me of those words that Isaiah speaks to us this morning about the bruised reed and the smoldering wick. Yes, these words from Isaiah about the bruised reed and the smoldering wick speak grace to us. Yes, they do. They remind us that there is a God who always is there to save us from our brokenness, to save us from being snuffed out like a wick. But it also reminds me and reminds you and me, that we by our own selves are but a broken reed, a smoldering wick, because we don't have what we need to get to where we want to be. No matter what human community might be behind us, no matter what human strength we might have, we end up at the end of the day like a bruised reed. My grandparents had a cabin up in northern Wisconsin, as we would say in Wisconsin, up north. They had this, and they called it a cabin. It was a 5-bedroom home, okay? And it was on the isthmus between two sides of the lake. So it was a nice place. But nonetheless, there were lots of cattails. And I'm counting on you knowing what cattails are. In the springtime, they are straight and strong. The wind can blow, and those cattails just flutter a bit in the wind. But as the autumn comes, you know those cattails, they become hollow. They become dry, and they break. And so the cattail that once stood so strong now is broken over and is kind of bobbing in the waves of the lake as the wind blows. Just kind of bobbing, getting saturated with the water, and eventually sinking in. And we, in our brokenness, are we much different than a cattail? Because when that strength that we think we have, that we can face anything. I am 17, I can drive, I can do whatever I want. I am educated, I am college graduate, I am, all those things we tell ourselves, that we are able to handle whatever comes our way. And yet when those things come, we find that like that dried up cattail, we are hollow. There is that God-sized space inside of us that needs to be filled because we cannot by ourselves stand. The scriptures have all kinds of words, especially in the Old Testament, to describe that weakness, that brokenness that we have. You'll hear the prophets talk about strengthen your weak hands. Straighten your bent knees. Straighten your bent back. Those are not just calisthenics that you might think they are the prophet's advice to us to just buck up. No, these are descriptions of how we are, that we don't have the strength in our hands. We don't have the strength in our knees. We don't have the strength in our spine to stand up straight because the difficulties of living in this broken world, the brokenness you and I have spiritually, the brokenness that you and I experience as we age and our bodies become like those cattails, broken and bent in the wind. We are but frail human beings, and we can't stand up straight by ourselves. We can't resist the wind, the storms that blow. We can't, because we don't have the strength. Physically, as we age, and spiritually, as we in our brokenness are so focused on ourselves, we try to fill that empty space inside with all kinds of things that make us happy, that fulfill our desires, that we think will be enough, to find that they aren't enough. That's where the picture of the smoldering wick comes from. Remember, back in the days that Isaiah wrote, there were no electric bulbs. There were no electric anythings except lightning. So everyone was lighting their houses with lamps. And those lamps needed to be filled with oil so the wick could continue to pull the oil towards the fire and give light, give heat. But when the oil is gone, so is the fire. When the oil is gone, there's just a smoldering wick left. So you and I, when we are at the end of our strength, when we have faced what has come our way and we have nothing left, we know what it is to be a smoldering wick. When those difficult times in life come, those tests that come our way, where, like Job, we find ourselves battered by the brokenness of this world, by the illness that affects our bodies, by the losses we experience as loved ones leave and loved ones die. When the troubles of job and life just catch up and suck the strength from us, like the fire burning the oil in the lamp, leaving nothing left. We know what it is to be weak. We know what it is to have that God-sized hole, craving, calling for something, someone to fill it. And so these words from Isaiah speak truth to us. They speak law to us because they tell us who we are apart from God. They tell us who we are despite our pride, despite our good feelings, despite everything we are at the end of the day. That broken cattail bobbing in the lake. We are that smoldering wick, hoping that we don't go out. Hoping for something, for someone to save us. And that's where the servant that the song that Isaiah writes speaks of comes in, because he comes in with salvation. He comes in to be that baby in the manger. You know, the wonder of Christmas should never be lost for us, because it is the amazing thing that we live in a culture, we live in a people group, we live in a race that seeks to go higher. You know, people saw birds fly and they wanted to fly too. We always want to go up. We want to climb the mountain. We want to be in the sky. We want to be in space. We want to be higher. And that spills into our spiritual lives too, as we feel that in order to get closer to God, we have to go up somewhere. We have to either be better at being who we are so we can get closer to him, or we need to leave this physical self behind, this physicality behind, and somehow get spiritually closer to God. But Christmas reminds us that God travels the opposite direction. He's not waiting for us to be good enough. He's not waiting for us to be spiritual enough. He comes down where we are. He comes as that baby in the manger. He brings himself to us because he knows that we can't bring ourselves to him. So he comes. Before we knew we needed a Savior, he promised one. Before we recognized our need to have God with us, he made the promise, and he was born as that baby in the manger. And Isaiah tells us, God speaks through his prophet, that the Father gives to the Son all his fullness. In him, in that baby, the fullness of God is wrapped up in human flesh and blood. In this one, as that little baby's hands reached out of the manger to grab his mother's fingers, his father's hand, fullness of God was there. All that God had to give was in those hands even then. All that God had to give was in those hands, as Jesus taught, as he fed the 5,000 with bread and fish, as he reached his hands to take the nails on the cross. Those hands were filled with all that God has to give us. And as he reached out to take the nails, he also reaches out to you and to me to invite us to be his, to invite us to receive his gifts. Because that's what he came to do, is to give us his forgiveness, to give us his love, to give us himself. As those hands that were nailed to the cross, those nail-scarred hands that reached on Easter morning to greet Mary Magdalene and assure us that death didn't win, that sin hasn't had the final word, that sin has been swallowed up, that death has been swallowed up, that Jesus reached into the grave with those hands and pulled out life for us. And now those same hands, like my father received from his fraternity friend, he gave to me. The Father gave to the Son, and the Son gives to you and to me, puts in our hands that forgiveness so that you and I can know that we are forgiven. He puts in our hands the gifts of eternal life so that you and I can know that no matter what comes, there is something next. There is an after. There is a forever with him. that sin doesn't win, that death doesn't win, that the difficult times we're finding ourselves, the valley of shadows doesn't win, because he, with his hands, puts his promises in our ears, in our lives, in our hearts, that we would know that we have a God who is with us, a God who is for us. And with that, with those gifts that he puts in our hands, with that invitation that he puts into our hands, as he claims our hands through the waters of baptism for himself, so that we would not only love him with heart, soul, mind, and strength, but also with our hands, with our feet, with our whole selves. And that we would love our neighbor as ourselves, so that the call that the Father gives to that servant is now given to us through Jesus, so that we, with our hands, with our feet, with our voices, now carry on as Jesus works through us, as Jesus invites us into the ministry, as Jesus invites us to love our neighbor as ourselves. I told you before that it was one of my dad's fraternity brothers that helped him find my wayward brother in Hawaii. You and I are now given into our hands to help others, to be the words that speak the words of comfort, the words of forgiveness to our neighbor, to be the hands that reach to help, to reach to comfort, to reach to assure that someone is there, flesh and blood level, for the one who is hurting, for the one who is wondering if anyone knows that they're there. So many people feel invisible. With your hands, you can reach out to assure them that you see them, that you are there with them. These hands that God has put his gifts into now. Our hands that were empty because we are, as broken people, empty. He now has filled that empty space in us, in our hearts, and now filled our hands with his gifts, with his blessings, with his stuff to give to his people. So that you and I have words to speak. There's forgiveness to be shared. There is hope to be spoken. The promises of God in his word. The connection that we have as brothers and sisters in Christ can be shared, can be expressed through actions that you and I can make. Through gestures, through just the gift of presence that you can physically, your feet can take you to that friend at the coffee shop, to that neighbor, to that hospital room, to be the person God has sent you to be, the one who shares comfort, the one who speaks forgiveness, the one who shares hope, the one who was his messenger, his servant for that person. So today, as we celebrate that God has sent his servant, and his servant Jesus accomplished all those things that he did for us. Now, as we're baptized and we remember our baptisms, as we celebrate who we are and whose we are through the waters, as we use this water to remind ourselves in this physical way, this touchy way, that we are indeed his people, that as we recommit ourselves, as we re-promise to God, we speak those promises to God again, not because we need that redemption again, but because we need reminding that we are his people, that from his hand to our hands, this commission, this forgiveness, this love, this service continues to hand down, hand over. It's not a surrender, it's a sharing. It's a handing over to those people that God has send you to comfort, to hope, to give hope, to speak forgiveness, to show love. So as we, in a moment, will come to the water again, to, if you wish, to remind yourself of whose you are in baptism. From his hand to your hand. Be reminded of what he's put in your hands. and the commission that he gives you to be his servant for him here, now. Amen. And now may the peace that passes all understanding keep our hearts and minds in true faith in Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.